Hello, this is Will again with another story. This one's a difficult story for me, so I'm a werewolf, a real werewolf. Someone on the comments section of the website was asking me about whether I'd actually really loved anybody and what that was like and things. So happily, this is the day when that love. Anyway, I need to just tell you the story. It's about someone that I did love. Okay, so a quick repast of where and what I am. I'd re-met my wife. It's a long story. You can already listen to it as Werewolf Meets His Wife if you're interested. And then there are a couple of videos on me actually meeting her family, which was actually my family. It was all a bit incestuous, to be honest, but that's werewolves. There's only 74 of us, I'm afraid. So if you go back and listen to the videos on the hunt, elk hunting, meeting grandfather, and the wife, you do this one will make a lot more sense. Asa was my wife, and the only thing that I ever really loved or put before myself or my posit. She was a black-haired Russian bestial beauty in wolf, werewolf, or woman form. She was the only thing that I'd ever wanted to want me. I think that's love for me. She was the only thing that I needed the support and the approval of. She was my everything, and she always will be my everything in life. I don't know what love is because I don't know if I'm capable of it, but this was as close as I was ever going to be. Every year we would go back to her homeland. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional. Every year we would go back to her homeland for her family's hunting season. We would fly into Surgut city in Siberia to meet her parents and the rest of the crew, as it were, and then we'd make our journey by car into the Ural Mountains to a little town called Sugar, which her family own outright, including its populace. That is the village where the werewolves originally were formed. From there we would become the wolves and head into the mountains for weeks of a hunt. They hunt for meat for the year. We hunt elk, ibex, tur and bear, and humans too. The villagers in that area know to be extremely careful in the late summer in the mountains. In the video that you can watch that meets the grandfather of the werewolves, I spoke of meeting with one of the original werewolves, a beast called Grigory. He was now not fond of his human form, rarely stepping back into it, but he wandered the mountains like a giant wolf for the better part of his life. My posit, my wolf soul, had been his brothers originally, Gennady, but he'd left the tribe and travelled away from them because he'd really fallen in love with Grigory's then pregnant wife. So he chose to leave and live a life alone rather than cause hurt to his family. Since then, Gennady had found love in another werewolf, in Asa, and I'd met her again. If you don't know what a posit is, it's the soul of the original wolf, and it's separate to me. It's a bit like I suppose it's like a ghost. And when I want to become a werewolf or a wolf, I absorb him to become those things. He can talk to me telepathically, and we share our memories and things. It's amazing. My wife was, as I said, a beauty called Asa, and Gennady's posit and her had been happy together for centuries until once again, due to unforeseen circumstances, the partnership had been torn apart, and that's another story in itself. Asa had met me again in St Andrews, Scotland, and brought me back to the family and reintroduced them as an important part of my life. My posit, the werewolf part of me, was linked to 5 other people before me. He'd lived centuries away from me and with other people. I'd told Grigory the truth, but Grigory could not accept that was the case. He thought that I had some link to his brother losing his posit, that I had hurt or killed his brother to take his posit, which of course is all nonsense, as if I could have taken the posit. Those people who are asking me to be a werewolf or turn them into a werewolf, you need to realise that the werewolf soul chooses you. There is no special spells or no, we don't bite you or some shit like that. Also, I'd found my new love at some stage of my posit's journey. My soul was now bound to my love Asa. Incestuously, it was Al Moko's daughter. Al was actually my nephew, but all the great families of power, the werewolves, like all the great families of power, the werewolves fought to maintain a purity of the bloodline. Now Grigor's blood ran down my arm as I lifted the remnants of his pulverised skull above my head. It was a bloody mess, a bloody pulp that meant I'd killed the beast. I roared into the night as the saliva sprayed from my broken jaw. His posit was lost and disappeared as his human host was killed. It would wander an invisible presence in the search for another to replace him as his human character. And his human carrier. He'd pushed me too far, and the result had been his death at my hands. He was much bigger and much more experienced than me. He was maybe stronger, but I had the speed and technique on my side. He'd never had to fight something like himself, something that could actually hurt him. I also had learned how to fight, not just murder those that can't defend themselves. I'd been wise in my hours. I'd done cross-training in several fighting arts to develop my whole game. I believe you call it mixed martial arts these days. I knew these wolves, they had no idea of technique. They just changed and charged for their attack, full of bloodlust and just for the reddening of tooth and claw. They needed no technique as they relied on their physicality and fear-inducing form to overwhelm and destroy their prey, which tended to work most of the time. Gregory had called me out in front of his worshipping tribe. He had said that I had no right to be a werewolf and have his brother's posit. He said he did not believe the stories that I told. He would not believe that my posit had left his brother, that somehow I had taken the posit, an impossibility. I thought he would realise that, but he had decided that I would pay for taking the posit. He was very wrong. It was him that paid. I robbed him of his life, and I robbed him of his posit. He had followed me from campsite to the clearing where I'd met my wife, Asa, alone. She'd been waiting for me, sitting in her human form, naked and unabashed in the snow. Asa was my wolfy wife. Her posit and mine were bound from a time before I knew her as well. She was beauty personified. Black hair like darkness, aquiline features, and well, everyone else uses it, limpid green pools for eyes. Oh, and yes, she had the very stars in the firmament floating in those deep green pools. I don't even know what limpid means, to be honest. And all that other romantic bullshit where he used to describe a fucking gorgeous, tight-bodied hottie. I mean, in reality, she was a really athletic woman, and she had a psychotic and miss and maladjusted personality, much like mine, and I loved it. But I have to try and make it sound like she was some ethereal creature, or it does not seem like a description of my love. She had a gymnast build and moved with, amazing grace. Not amazing grace in the religious sense, maybe in a certain more sacrilegious religions, but her body insinuated through the world, driving people wild, and werewolves. I'm sure she was in many a person's wank bank. Good word choice, huh? Well, they all do. Asa was everything. She had smiled and stood up as I entered the clearing. The joy in her face on seeing me became apparent. It gave me a little warm feeling inside as I realised she was mine and I was hers. Yeah, it was all getting a bit twilighty, isn't it? I'll stop. I don't want this to be full of that romantic bullshit, so let's get back to the violence. Then he'd arrived. Already angry and with his hackles raised, even in a human form, he was a bit scary. Luckily, my response to being scared was different than most. It usually leads me to kill whatever caused the fear so that it could not do it again. Always the best answer I find, to be scared of something. Fucking destroy it. "You are a fucking liar, my friend," I heard him say in his heavy accent from somewhere behind me. I grinned at Asa, kissed her raised hand and turned towards him. He was at the edge of the clearing, and he could speak English when the mood fucking suited him. "You lie about my brother. He did not leave for love. He left for selfish reasons. He was full of hate, as you are. That will end today. You are broken, psychotic, a killer for no reason, but your own pleasure. You are not a hunter, a member of the pack. You are a real monster. You must be killed. My brother's posit deserves better." He was physically shaking as he shouted at me, his face contorted in a mask of hate. I looked at my posit who was sat with Asa's white wolf. "What, Will? Don't you believe me?" my posit asked. "This guy's off his head," he added. I nodded and turned to face Gregory. "I told you the truth." Grigor growled. I think he thought he was scaring me or something. He now started pacing back and forth around the edge of the clearing. His face was a horrific picture of hate. His posit was doing the same as its master. It was pacing in counter motion to him. The hate that they both generated was palpable, and it, well, I have to admit, turned me on a bit. I got a little bit stiff in the lower regions, and Asa's giggle at her noticing this did nothing to take the edge off the anger of the old wolf. I smiled at her, somewhat bemused, and laughed as I just accepted what was going to happen. I was not going to back down. I was not going to submit to this moth-bitten excuse for a mutt. You know what? Believe what the fuck you want. I don't give a fuck anymore. You know what? I'm sick of all this respect Gregory shite that is all this lot fucking say and do. I waved my hands to the crowd of wolves and people now surrounding the clearing. They keep on fucking telling me. I put on a weak, whiny voice at this moment. Oh, Gregory's a legend and a hero. Gregory did this and Gregory did that. All this exaggerated bullshit about your prowess in killing hundreds of human warriors and shit. Well, come on then, fight me. I will tear your wolfy fucking head off, scoop out your tiny brain material, and replace it with one of my vast and hairy shits. I laughed, and I kind of knew that I'd already taken it too far, so I thought, fuck it, in for a penny, in for a pound. With my shit for brains, you will be a damn sight more intelligent than you are now. You're going to find that your stupid failed deductions have led you to being dead. You fucking dumb bastard. The erudite speech had started off well, but not been too strong at the finish, but I had tried. Asa gasped as she reached for my fingers to hold them and give me a little support. I took her hand and drew her behind me and stood between him and her. This was going to be a huge amount of fun. At last I was going to get to fight a motherfucking werewolf. Not only that, but I was going to get a shot at the werewolf of all the werewolves. I could feel the adrenaline levels rise. The thrill of the fight was building. No one could blame me for killing this fool. Well, they could, and they probably would, but that's the future. So that's for the future Will to worry about. I was going to rip this lying piece of shit apart and enjoy every fucking moment of it. The consequences were, well, again in the future, not something that I should or would consider at this point. Fuck it. Let's work with one problem at a time. And it was a fun problem to deal with, in my opinion. Step away from him, Asa, or you will suffer similar fate. You, Asa, should be punished for bringing this real animal into our pack. Step away. He was really angry, and spit was flying from his face as he said this to her. He was talking to my wife. His cool and measured tone was all but lost. It was awesome. As an aside from this moment, I may have mentioned before that I hate all this peacocking and alpha dogging shite that males tend to do. They always try to frighten their opponent with words and postures instead of just getting the fuck on with it. I just wish they would get to the fucking bit that's good, the fight. Asuna was scared and looked unsure as to her next step. This shit talking was just a little too much for me to deal with. It was boring, and he was trying to scare and humiliate me in front of my wife. He was trying to scare her into not supporting me and trying to give her the fear so that she dumped me and fled to security of her family's bosom. He was trying to make her choose between family and me. I'd just had enough at this point. He was going to get truly fucked up. Do you know what, mate? I'm only pleasant to you, Gregory, because my partner expects me to be. I only do it out of respect I have for her, this beautiful woman. I think that you are an anachronism, a thing of the past, at the wrong time. You've been surpassed by your children that know that money and power in politics and business are the real ways to run the world. You, as your wolf in the mountains thing, are just a little pathetic, to be honest. In reality, it's obvious that you are too frightened to live in the real world, a world that is actually dangerous for you because you cannot understand it. I monologued proudly. Gregory stopped pacing and he spat at the floor. If you want to try and kill me, pup, then try to do so. It will be an unfortunate way for you to die, he replied. I smiled at him, and then This bit was going to be awesome. I was going to fuck him up. Asa tried to interject. He shut her down with a growl and spat at her. She submitted in response, shrinking back and exposing her throat to him. That only added my over-the-top levels of fury. I did not get angry often, but this seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to allow it to run free. Back down, you stupid bitch whore, he said as he casually pointed at her. I stared at his finger, then followed its direction to my wife. Not a good move on his part. This was now the last straw, and the red mist fell before my eyes. My posit bayed for his blood and screamed in my head to fight. I drew my posit in, and we came together to become my monster. I absorbed him and transformed quickly, growing in height, my body swelling, my torso and limbs expanding as I changed. I roared, starting as a human sound, and changed to the horror of the screaming beast. I built myself into the monstrosity of the werewolf that I am before him, and I thoroughly enjoyed the ecstasy of the moment. No pain suffered in this change, just an orgasmic joy. I opened my hands as my knife-like claws extended from my fingers, and my digits grew in length. My wolfen snout extended, and the teeth pushed into place in my jaws. Finally, my matte black pelt swathed my body, a dark shadow in the day. My bright amber eyes surveyed the scene. He was going to die, and it was going to be a long and painful death. I was going to tear him into small pieces for his lack of humility and manners. Well, not for that, really, just because I really, really, really wanted to. He stood smiling before me, his arms crossed in front of his chest, and watched me change. He seemed to show no fear in his body language. He was utterly dismissive as I reached my bestial form. Once I had completed my change, he clapped and mocked me with a smile. You are fucking pathetic even in that form, he spat at me. He then changed. He became his own monster. His scarred face transformed into a ravaged giant's wolf head. He was much larger than I. He had muscles piled on muscles, but was roughly of the same height. His rough pelt showed the scars of many fights pre-werewolf. His slavering maw displayed a mishmash of yellow teeth and broken teeth. His paw, hands and claws huge, but showing broken talons and the prior damage of his early life. Once he changed into his monster, he laughed a wolfy laugh. He postured, and with his body language, which told me, you are nothing, he smiled, flexing his right paw as he wandered back and forth, staring at me. Yeah, I kind of have to admit it was pretty impressive. No, wait a minute. No, not impressive at all. Look at it. An old, broken mess. I was actually hoping he would be bigger. I was a little disappointed. Is this the legendary figure we're told to respect and fear? He charged as I turned my back. Weak ass coward attacking my back. I turned to face him and smiled as I prepared to meet him by lowering my stance and circling to my right. My lead hand extended forward, and my palm, with which I gently touched his forehead as he ran towards me. As my palm touched him, I stepped back with my left foot and used my straightened left arm to redirect his movement past and circle to my left at the same time. I had practiced this move 1,000 times in the training room, and it was perfect against a person or a werewolf just trying to run in and grab you in a bum rush. He went past, in his bum rush, slightly off balance as I simply slid out of the path. He did not even know something as basic as how to do a double leg takedown. As he went running past, I removed my palm from his head and, twisting my shoulders with force, slammed a right cross into the side of his head. The knuckles buried deep into the muscle, and the powerful blow made him stumble and fall to his hands and knees. His continuing momentum from the shot meant that he slid to a stop on his hands and knees in front of me and shook his head. As he turned to look at me on the floor, I could see he was a bit confused. His face displayed shock. A little bit of doubt was seen on that doggy face for a moment before quickly turning back into the angry, snarling monster that he was. I laughed and was a few feet away from him now, nodding at him as I called him onto me. The training had paid off, especially against this untrained beast. He slowly got back to his feet in front of me, wiping his forearm across his head. He shook his head again and looked puzzled as he tried to work out his next move. The bum rush had not worked. This was his method of attack. It always worked. You charged in and you grabbed them. but it was not working now, and he got to his feet ready to make up another move. He'd probably not had another move for many centuries. I stepped forward towards him in an actual fighting stance, left leg in front of the right, in a boxer stance, my hips askew, hands high, waiting for his tack. It did not come, he just stood before me, feeling a little impotent at what had just happened. I smiled and waved him onto me again. He would leap at some point, he knew no other way to hunt or fight. He had just one system: charge! I smiled as he jumped forward, and I lifted my lead leg and push-kicked the beast in the belly. It stopped his torso dead on the spot, and his arms were thrown forward by the whiplash from the sudden stop of the kick. As it landed, I extended the talons of my foot onto his belly and raked it down through his gut towards his crotch, opening wounds that flowed free with blood. A killing strike for the non-immortal. I then pushed him away with a powerful push, and he fell on his backside. I now was smiling and enjoying the moment, laughing at him with wolf-contorted roars. He sat thinking before he slowly got up again and started to walk back and forth in front of me, snarling. I could sense his rage building. He held his palm on his lower abdomen, stemming the blood flow. The deep gouges in his flesh were visibly healing as he moved. This would be a long fight to the death, especially as we both could repair ourselves. I fucking live for this. He removed his bloody palm from his now healed low abdomen and checked his hand. His eyes locked up with mine. He was confused and showing dismay at his treatment. He paced right and left in front of me, not taking his eyes off mine. As he did this, I scanned the clearing for anything that may be useful in the fight. I noticed a large rock sat in the grass. I moved towards it, not taking my eyes from the pacing beast. I reached down slowly for the stone, picked it up and hefted its weight in my hand, while showing it him. So he knew that was what was going to happen. I launched myself forward, throwing the stone as high as I could at his head. He caught the rock in his hand, dismissively smiling, but did not expect the right cross punch that came behind it and buried itself in his throat. As the punch landed, I had already twisted my hips and slammed a left hook to his only working eye, feeling the crunch of the orbital bone as it landed. Continuing forward, I swept his legs from under him and finally throwing a stomp on his head as he fell towards the ground. Luckily, or maybe not luckily for him, he managed to shift his head at the last second and my foot impacted the floor, raising dust like shrapnel from its impact. But as the dust rose, my right hand snatched his muzzle, like a handle, sealing his mouth closed together with my claws stapling through the skin of his jaws so that he could not even open his mouth. With this superb grip, I turned his head sideways to the ground and head-butted the side of his skull, dazing him. Once I realised he was discombobulated, I bit deep into his throat, feeling my teeth meeting the meat of his neck. There was a joy in the blood flowing into my mouth. It tasted like nothing I had ever tasted before. Fucking werewolf blood tastes amazing. I wanted more. Maybe I would imbibe his posit if I drank enough. I grabbed hard. My jaws clamped on his neck, and with clenched teeth I ripped back and forth, powerfully tearing more tissue and pelt with the incisors and canines. Bliss! He was done in my eyes, but somehow his hand reached for me and grabbed my ear and cheek. I felt claws rip deep into my flesh, tearing it down to the bone. He used the attachment in my flesh as a handle and pulled my face away from his throat. He punched me with his right hand several times into the side of my jaw, loosening teeth and cracking bones. I turned my head and locked my teeth around the forearm of his limb that was controlling my head. I bit with all my might, crunching bone and ripping tendons that now could no longer force his dagger-tipped fingers to hold my head. As he let go, I snapped bites at the withdrawing hand and removed 2 digits that I spat back at him. Still pinning his head and posturing above him, I foolishly roared my rage inches from his face, releasing him in order to stamp down on his head once more. That was a mistake. He had moved with incredible speed, catching my foot and twisting it with ligament-breaking force. The pain was intense and wholly absorbing. Keeping control of my leg, he rose to his feet and threw my slack-damaged ankle into the air. It took my balance for a moment, and I fell, landing on my back, winded but already moving as he tried to get to grips with me. I scrambled to my feet. My broken ankle already was slowly healing, and it had healed enough to offer me support as he swung a looping slash, slicing me with the tips of his claws. I staggered back as he fell onto me. I bitch-slapped his face, and he stopped and snorted, allowing me to get my feet back under me. I think he found the slap humiliating waiting in front of the other wolves. This was a massive show of disrespect, and I could see the anger develop further in him as he paused. Awesome. I wish I'd done it on purpose. He responded by raising himself to his full height, and while extending his arms, he released a gigantic bellow of anger. I wagged my finger at him using the international sign language of saying no to the naughty toddler. I then showed my teeth in a grin and gave him the international sign of disrespect, the middle finger salute of fuck-offness. I was not a pitiful human that he could simply tear asunder. I was not scared of this beast. I was quite hot for this. It would not be an unfair fight from my point of view. This was actually going to be a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. The clearing now was gathering an audience from the tribe. They came in various forms and in various states of concern. I even saw Al as he came running towards and transform, and he was ready to prepare to join the fight, to take Grigor's place. Grigory pushed him back and waved him away. I was lucky he waved them all back. 70-odd werewolves against one would have been a little tough to deal with. Al nodded and made everyone back away from the ensuing conflict. Again, Grigory lunged, overextending himself and sweeping his clawed hand in a wide, slow circle. He was aiming to rip my face off my skull with his talons. As the claw came in, I dipped below the blow, allowing it to skiff the top of my scalp, allowing a few hairs to be removed by its contact, but that was all. As the hand went past, he had thrown himself off balance and stumbled forward. In response, I brought a shovel hook up into his body, hitting the liver and folding the werewolf in half around my fist. The power of his upward body punch lifted his feet off the ground, and I followed it with an open-clawed right hook to the head. The claws tore the ear and flesh from the side of his head, then sent him floundering away from me. The beast ended up sitting on his haunches, shaking his head as blood streamed from the torn wound. Flesh now hung from his face, and the skull was visible from my strike. He bellowed his fury at his treatment, and then he leapt to his feet, running forward in a head-down charge. As he entered my kicking range, I threw a head kick, the shin of my left leg burying into his jaw and loosening teeth and smashing bones. Grigory was knocked to his werewolf arse once more, and I stepped forward and launched a volley-like soccer kick at his head, the finishing blow to this fight. With preternatural speed, he managed to lift a hand to block the blow, but it was not enough to turn the strike. My kick went into and through his lower arm, shattering it. The kick continued its journey onwards and crashed into the other side of the beast's face, tearing flesh and smashing more bones. It was a great shot, removing the last of the fucking teeth from his head. As I withdrew my leg, he sat for a moment, his head warped. It was out of shape. It was horrific, and it was no representation of the proud beast he'd once been. He looked at me briefly with some level of recognition. He then went down on his face like a tree cut at the base. I stepped back in celebration. This moment was my ultimate test and my ultimate win. I'd never felt more powerful and satisfied. I'd fought me and won. As I stood over him, I saw he was twitching and his flesh was healing. I needed to finish this. I could not let him get up and recover, so I started to stamp on his head. Stamp on his head. I stamped and stamped, crushing the skull, smearing the brain, the blood and the bone into the ground. The puddle of brain mass splashed around, and I did not stop until I was tired. Then reaching down, I tore the pulpy mess that was the remnants of his skull away from the body, lifting it high to show the others around me. This was the only way a werewolf could die, ruin and remove its head. He was fucking dead. And that's when the shit hit the fan. Two brothers now in wolf form, werewolf form, held Asa's hand. She struggled, and I could see her posit enter her body as she became her wolfen self. She rallied against the two beasts, but they held her so she could not escape, and her head fell to her chest as she knew that she would be my downfall. Al stepped forward, flanked by his posit. He was in human form. Will, if you do not submit to us, I will have Asa torn apart in front of you right now. He stood at a comfortable distance with the two werewolf guards on either side of him, all ready to intercept me if I made a move. I knew it was over. I'd killed the real alpha or the patriarch or whatever fucking led the group, and I was going to pay for such an outrageous thing. The two werewolves holding Asa had forced her down to her knees. They were twisting her arms in her shoulders in order to get her to kneel. I could sense her asking for me to run, to get away, to save myself, but I could not leave her to such a fate. I walked back and forth, snarling and spitting my fury in Al's direction. My posse was angry and wanted to charge. He wanted to take on the world. He wanted to die in the moment of glory, but I felt something new. I felt something for Asa that I could not understand, and in our shared form, it was the first time we had ever not felt the same. It rang out in my mind, a huge discord of feeling, and my posse left me. As just a man I stood, and my posse walked away from me. The first time he'd ever done so. He said nothing and did not look at me. He just left me and walked away. It was the coldest feeling that I'd ever had. I felt alone, unwanted and uncared for, frightened and forsaken, and then, oh fuck this, I'm going to fuck everything up into a right royal mess. I shed tears as I knelt before Al. I placed my hands behind my head and submitted to whatever his will would want. Two werewolves came forward and lifted me by my arms. My posse smiled and laughed as I was carried forward and stood by Asa, who had horror and fear covering her werewolf face. She reached for me and held my hand, and I smiled at her, nodding, trying to make her feel some comfort in this moment. This creature was brought into our circle by Asa, my daughter. This man does not deserve a posse of such fame. He is a murderous killer of his own folk, taking our legendary leaders, brothers Posit, and using him against the humans and the world, and finally against us. He twisted the ideas that we live by. The humans are here to serve us and provide for us, but should be treated with respect of all prey animals that we hunt and need. Today he killed Grigory, the greatest of us. He will die in a long, painful manner. He is forsaken. He will die in his puny human form, and he will endure without a posit. He has humiliated my daughter. He must pay. Al turned from his oratory to the tribe of wolves. He looked at me and spat on the floor. Asa pulled herself towards me and held me one more time. I will banish this fool, and if he ever comes or becomes a wolf again, I will hurt and torture her every day. I am willing to sacrifice my own daughter in this way, the only thing that he cares for. I will hurt her before him like he has hurt my family, and torture him in the ways he tortured others through her. She is the only thing that he has ever cared for except for himself. She will suffer for him, and he will suffer for her. I stood before my crying Asa. We were human now, naked and holding hands as we looked into each other's eyes. The tears ran down her face and she sniffed and mouthed an apology. I slowly reached both hands up to cradle her head. There seemed a beautiful moment of peace and silence as I leant forward and kissed her on the forehead. In that moment there was stillness, silence, and an intake of breath from those watching. The silence was broken by the roar of my posit as he tore into my frame, instantly transforming me into the werewolf. I looked into those emerald green eyes of my beloved one. My last view was through my wolfy vision as I looked at the most beautiful thing that I'd ever seen or known. I smiled as I knew what I had to do. I crushed her skull between my paws. Once dead, Asa could never be used against me. I killed the thing I loved most in order to be truly free. Now I would fight with her spirit, giving me much more power. I would now kill all these pathetic creatures that called themselves monsters. I would be the only monster left after this day. I would run and hide, but then I would hunt those that hunted me. Their deaths would be my true greatest glory. As I crushed her skull, the wolf to her right turned to bite deep into my arm, and I caught the upper jaw in my hand and forced my left to grab the lower jaw as I ripped the two apart, removing the top of his head, which I threw into the crowd which had gathered. As the jaws separated, I push-kicked the flinching body into another werewolf, that stood behind it. As the kick landed, it went to the ground, and I moved forward, threw a roundhouse kick that swept the other werewolf, holding my ass's body off its feet to land solidly with brutal impact on the ground. I brought the heel of my kicking leg back down with as much force as I could to crush the flawed animal's skull. It was obliterated with the contact, and yes, I killed that wolf instantly. It was over so quickly that the other surroundings had no or little time to react. The result of my moment's work was devastating. I'd killed 5 of the beasts in a few seconds. They felt something now. They felt something they'd never felt before. They felt fear that they could be killed. They had a fear of their lost immortality. I could savour the fear now. They all looked upon me as something new, something that they could not define or deal with. The power it gave me was incredible. I stood looking at the group of monsters before me. They were all hesitant, and none of them would be the first to make their moves towards me. I raised myself to my full height and roared my fury at them. They all took a step back. Even the mighty fucking Al was hesitant. I'd just killed his 2 sons and his daughter, and now he was impotent. I laughed at him, a guttural laugh, and turned to walk away. They would eventually get up the courage to follow me, but at this moment, as long as I slowly walked away, they would stay like the good doggies that they were. If I turned tail, they would run in after me and turn into the wolves that they are, and chase. As soon as I made safe cover of the brush at the edge of the clearing, I changed to my wolf form. I then made it across country. I would let them regroup. I would let them chase, and I would kill them. I would kill them all. I lost my assa. They would lose absolutely fucking everything.